Chris Holtmann is out as the Ohio State head men's basketball coach. We'll see who replaces him. For now, it's Jake Diebler. That's Andy Backstrom in the middle of your screen. That's Tim May over there on the other side of the screen, the 41-year vet. He's here. And we're going to talk some Ohio State hoops because groundbreaking news on Wednesday, Valentine's Day. Gene Smith officially makes the move to fire Chris Holtmann with, I think, 6 games left in the regular season. $12.7 million buyout. You obviously have to buy out the assistants as well if they're going to go, and then you have to find a new replacement. This is a very expensive decision, comes with a hefty price tag for Gene Smith on his way out the door. And now Ross Bjork is going to have to make the first major decision of his Ohio State tenure before it even begins. Andy, I'm going to start with you because you are the full-time basketball writer here. You know this team better than Tim and I could dream of right now. Is this surprising to you? Chris Holtmann said maybe he was a little blindsided by it. Are you surprised by this move right now?
I'm surprised when it happened. I'm surprised it happened with 6 games left. They host number 2 Purdue on Sunday. I mean, that's a tough test for interim head coach Jake Diebler in a home game against one of the best teams in the country. So that's why I'm surprised, just given when it's happened. You know, Gene Smith said it's just based off the last few games. He felt like there needed to be a change of leadership. But then again, Ohio State's lost 9 of the last 11 games. And you ask, why didn't this happen after Northwestern when they were 1 point down, 35 points in the second half, or when they lost to Nebraska and that thing didn't look pretty either. So it is a little bit odd that it happens right now compared to maybe a little bit earlier in the Big Ten play. He said he wanted to create a runway for Jake Diebler and these players to build some kind of momentum. I guess you're thinking that maybe you can have some player retention if they build some kind of momentum, similar to last year's Big Ten tournament push. But in today's college basketball, you just kind of see a lot of these players flocking for the transfer portal after a coaching change. So we'll see what happens. But ultimately, this decision was Gene Smith deciding to put his personal side and put the program first and firing Chris Holtmann, who he clearly holds a lot of respect for. And he gave him an extension in May 2022 through the 2027-28 season because of that respect and belief in what he could do at Ohio State.
Yeah, we'll get into that extension and more here, Tim. But Tim, you've covered the athletic department for a long time, not necessarily the hoops program, but from an athletic department standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, from Gene Smith's standpoint, what did you think when you first saw this news yesterday around noon local time?
It's funny on my podcast this week. Jeff Snook, one of my best friends, but he's a huge Ohio State backer, fan, etc., and been a big critic of Chris Holtmann for a while, and he thought it was more than, we talked about it even before it happened. That was overdue. What I see here, I see exactly what Gene Smith is trying to do, and I know it. Some people are going to laugh, but I think he's trying to, in some way, salvage some part of this season for the players, because clearly, fellas, except for that win over Maryland, I mean, in recent times, just like last year during that ridiculous February, it's just not happening. I mean, it wasn't happening under Chris Holtmann, one of the great guys I've ever met. I mean, cordial. I think he's very smart, etc. But especially the way games have been managed at the end of games and things like this, you never know. You never know what you can do as a head coach until you get that shot I'm talking about with Diebler, and to label the entire coaching staff under the same things that have happened to this basketball team last year, and then this winter, Diebler may have that spark. He may provide that spark that they need, or that more than anything, that little strategy thing they need at the end of games, which is really what's happened to the Chris Holtmann era, is not finishing. And it's too bad. But if they can provide some spark for these players who deserve, maybe another way of looking at things. And I see what Gene is doing. That's tough, man. When you've given a guy an extension, it's costing your firm money. Now you're going out the door, here in a couple of months, Gene is. But you owe it to him. But you also owe it to the incoming athletic director that if this is not working, this was your mess on aisle 3 to clean up, and it looks like Gene Smith has taken that responsibility. And let's face it, you don't just make these kind of decisions in a microcosm. I mean, it's a macrocosm thing. I'm sure he was getting input from all kinds of alums, et cetera, who were in essence fed up with Ohio State, with all the money, largesse, resources, et cetera, it has, being an afterthought in basketball. Not even an afterthought, really. So I totally understand the timing. I like Chris Holtmann, but really that has nothing to do with this one.
Yeah, Gene Smith was emotional when asked about how hard it was to fight because he's built a great relationship with Chris Holtmann. Also, this was his big hire. Thad Matta took the program to really one of maybe the highest marks in program history because the national championship came before the expansion of the tournament. So it's just basically a different era. There are a few programs who have been more successful in college basketball as Ohio State since the tournament expanded in 1985. So like this is not a program where we can just say, well, it's kind of an afterthought. It, like you said, Tim, it has become an afterthought, and apathy, I think, is worse than failure. And so when you start to see an apathetic fan base and they're not showing up and the shot's hollow and you're losing an 18-point lead at home against Indiana, who's not very good either, like something had to be done. I think where it goes from here is like, Andy, there are a few different things that kind of led to this moment, right? I think number one, it's completely unfair to point to anything other than when Ohio State decided, Gene Smith and Chris Holtmann together decided they were going to go young at the end of the 2022 season. After losing to Villanova in the second round of the playoff or the tournament over in Pittsburgh, they decide they're going to go young, recruit, build a roster. 2 years later, they're not seeing the results. In that same offseason, they go young. They lose Ryan Peaton, Chris Holtmann's right-hand man and number one top assistant. He's a very good basketball coach. Losing him was not something that really grabbed headlines, but it was certainly a big deal for the next, if we can look back, hindsight's 2020, but looking back, Ryan Peaton being gone has played a huge role in this. And then I think the loss to Oral Roberts the year before that kind of tanked this thing a little bit and got it going maybe in the opposite direction of what you were hoping. Like those are the three big things that I would point to, Andy. Is there anything that I'm missing there that you can point to and say like, okay, this is where things started to go wrong or things ultimately did go wrong?
I think he brought in a lot of talent. He's clearly a player developer. We look at the three players that went to the NBA in the last 2 years. You have EJ Liddell, Malachi Branham, and Bryce Sensabaugh. He brought in talent. Before that was Keita Bates-Diop in his first couple of years. First year, they were actually helping him get to the NBA. And clearly he can develop talent, recruit talent, back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes the last 2 years. But just because you have talent doesn't mean you're going to have a good team. They weren't necessarily fitting to play together as a team. The transfer portal acquisitions he had the last couple of years, again, players that were productive at their previous stops, but then would come to Ohio State and suddenly you're like, wait, this is the same guy they got from Baylor, West Virginia, Wright State, etc. No, it didn't look like it. They just were not performing the same way they were at their previous stops. And that raises the question of why aren't they fitting here? What's not working with these top tier recruits, top 100 guys that are not progressing at the level you would think they would? As Gene Smith said, there's a lot of minutes on that court. Yes, these guys are young, quote young, but at this point, they're really juniors. I mean, we talk about this about football all the time. The guys come in the winter and then by the spring or the summer, they're basically not freshmen anymore. Roddy Gale Jr., Bruce Thornton, Felix Okpara, these are guys that are basically juniors now. They've played so much basketball. They've started 50-plus games at this point, and you're still not getting the results. You're still games. And at a certain point, yeah, you have to look at it. Why aren't they fitting? And I think that's the big thing. Yes, there's the talent here. And that's why every national media person is a little bit surprised at this, because you look at the roster of Ohio State preseason, they were supposed to be much better this year. You understand when they're freshmen, when they're sophomores, they were expected to take this step. And in college basketball nowadays, rebuilds don't really exist. You should be good after 1 or 2 years, even 1 year with the transfer portal. And that just wasn't happening. So I think it's really just not the talent, it's the fit. And when that's not working, you need to change your leadership.
Yeah, and what's bothered me, I mean, like you say, I don't cover basketball, but I've been around it and been, paid attention. But what bothered me just from a playing the game aspect of things or managing the game aspect of things is how so often in some of these blown leads and things like that at the end of games, how the wrong guy has the ball in his hands. I mean, or the play that's drawn up, has not worked. I mean, that's just basketball X's and O stuff. And that's after a couple of times you go, okay. But then when it happens repeatedly, you just kind of go, there's just something missing there from a basketball 101 standpoint that has been intriguing. Let's say that to me, that you get to those points in a lot of these games, and then the team doesn't either the right play isn't called or the right guy doesn't get the ball. That's all the way back to practice, et cetera. And when you look at the video of that, when you're a fan watching the game, but then you look at the video of that as coaches, why is it continuing to happen? Would be the question I would have, because fellas, we can talk about what a great guy he is, how good how many the roster he's put together, the great players that have come through here, the NBA types that have come through here, but it always comes down to the ball going through the hoop at the end of the game. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. And for whatever reason, except for that great streak in the Big Ten tournament last year, there hadn't been a whole lot to really root about in the winter for Ohio State basketball for a couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years is the key word there, because you get a 2 seed in 2021 after
Yeah.
taking Illinois to overtime in the Big Ten championship game. You're oh so close to breaking through and having that marquee Chris Holtmann
Right.
Year where he hangs his hat on. You lose to Illinois. Probably the worst thing that could have happened was making that run in the Big Ten tournament, because you 4 days later have to turn around and play an Oral Roberts team that was really rested. You lose the 2-15 game. I think there's only 9 of those that have ever happened. So you're on the wrong side of history there. And then it kind of all downhill from there. You can take the I think the 9 seed or the 8 seed in the 2022 tournament, and then the last 2 years have been what they are. And everybody, and nobody really cares anymore. Who's next? Like that's what everybody wants to know, right? The coach is fired. All right, let's go. Who's next? Let's saddle up, boys. We're hiring a new basketball coach. Andy, you have it out already. The hot board from yesterday. There are quite a few names on there. There's more names that can be explored. Anybody who would like to take a stab at creating a list, good luck, because not only are you dealing with one of the top athletic departments and one of the richest athletic departments in the country, you're also dealing with one of the top athletic departments and richest athletic departments in the country that has a brand new head man running the show. And so not only do you have to take the Ohio State connections and the Ohio connections and the Gene Smith connections, you kind of throw those out the window, because now you've got to look at Ohio, Big Ten, Ross Bjork, and what he looks for in basketball coaches. So, Andy, what's the hot board telling you right now? What's the crystal ball saying?
Yeah, I mean, if it's me making the decision, and if I'm Ross Bjork, I'm looking at Dusty May. I think he's going to be at the top of every college basketball coaching list. He was at the top last season, then signed a huge extension with FAU. And I think he's going to be a big name that's kind of hot among all of these coaching searches. Clearly, that historic run he had last year, but then coming back with basically the same core again this year is impressive. Also, Sean Miller is just a name that's going to be out there for Ohio State, given the Xavier ties. He's been the head coach at Xavier twice, played at Pittsburgh, coached at Pittsburgh. He's been around the Midwest. Arizona is obviously the notable tenure he had that was marred by that investigation regarding recruiting violations and whatnot. Then you're going to also have Lamont Paris, who's one of the more inexperienced head coaches, but someone that's just a huge name right now with South Carolina being as good as they are in the top 15, 21-3 last time I checked. I'm not sure how last night's game went, but a very successful season for Lamont Paris. And then, we've been talking about this. You got to mention someone even like Thad Matta, who, we've seen coaches return before. It's not unheard of. That's just a name probably just to have it on the radar. His health issues are supposedly better at this point, coming back with Butler. But then there's a few other wild cards that I would just keep in mind. We're talking about like Greg McDermott was targeted in the last coaching search for Ohio State. He's the Creighton head coach. The thing there is just he's been at Creighton for so long. You don't know if he's ever going to make that move. And if he did, maybe it would be for some warmer weather at this point of his career. So there's a lot of names that you can consider. But again, as you mentioned, with the Ross Bjork, like maybe he looks at Buzz Williams at Texas A&M. I mean, he didn't make that hire at Texas A&M, but he oversaw everything that Buzz Williams has done, getting Texas A&M back to the NCAA tournament. When you've got an AD coming in, you always have to look at their previous connections. So a lot of names, a lot of excitement. I do think Ohio State will try to hire a Power 5 or Power 6 in college basketball guy. I don't see them necessarily going the mid-major route, but if they do, Pat Kelsey from College of Charleston is probably the top name there.
Yeah, Tim, I don't mean to cut you off there, Tim, but it's an interesting situation Ohio State's in, because not only are you a football school, and I know you're one of the richest schools, but you also just paid your basketball coach $17.2 million to go sit on the beach. So like that's just the reality of the situation. I look at a guy like TJ Otzenberger at Iowa State, and it's like, man, he is doing a great job at Iowa State. He did a great job at his previous stops. Is he somebody you're going to talk to? Well, guess what? He comes with an 8-figure price tag just on the buyout. Then you also have to pay him his money. So not only would you pay Chris Holtmann's buyout, you would pay a buyout to another school, and you would pay a new salary with a new coaching staff. Dusty May is almost the same situation. That's an 8-figure buyout because of the way he just restructured at FAU. Now, he also is an Indiana grad. Is he going to want to play Indiana 3 times a year potentially? So, those are the things that are going on here. And I don't think Ohio State's going to be cheap with this hire, but I think that Ohio State will be calculated with this hire because they are going to keep in mind, yes, they have that war chest. They're getting, more money than any of us could ever dream. Well, maybe Tim's been doing this a long time. More money than Andy and I could dream of, telling Chris Holtmann to go away. And Ohio State has that money to do these things because of the TV deals. But how much money are you going to wrap into basketball in a 3-month span? Is it going to be $34 million to go buy out a coach, go target another coach, and then pay the other coach? So, these are things that have to be considered, Tim. With this new candidates list, the buyouts for not just Chris Holtmann, but for the next guy, because you also have to pay him after you buy him out.
Oh yeah, but that is modern. That is modern college sports economics. I'm gonna say 101 again, just because I like saying that. Modern college sports economics. I mean, Dusty May, that has a great ring to it. That last name, that's pretty cool. But I don't think it would bother anybody to come coach against their alma mater. Gary Moeller did a pretty good job at Michigan as the head football coach, and he was a captain in Ohio State football. But that's another story. Here's the corner you back yourself into when you fire a coach at a place like Ohio State, where you're paying him pretty good money, and like you said, what they owe him. I'm sure that will probably be paid off in increments, I would think, just like what's, happening with Jimbo Fisher. I mean, nobody knows this better than Ross Bjork, how to pay off a big-time guarantee at this point, because it's the biggest of the biggest, the biggest of the big. But I'm sure that will be done in increments. So I kind of discount that, pardon the pun, and just move on. But, you kind of backed yourself into a corner here now, because you got to get somebody that is either proven or that people know from the standpoint of resurrecting the program in the public's eye right off the bat, and I don't when I was listening there, because I had my sound off for a minute because I have this cold I picked up in Las Vegas. Not everything you pick up in Las Vegas stays in Vegas. But Chris Gent, for example, is a guy that's interesting to me only because of his love of Ohio State, the fact that he was a hell of a player at Ohio State. He's been in the NBA D League, I think, for a while and stuff, and has aspired to be the coach here. That would be an interesting hire in that regard. But, when you're out of college basketball, for a while, do you lose the contacts? Do you lose the recruiting? I'm not sure that's that important from the standpoint of being able to learn quickly and on the job. But that's a name that comes to mind for me that people would embrace. The big time fans of the program would get along, because, like I said, Gene Smith didn't just make this in a vacuum. I think I said microcosm a while ago. I meant vacuum. I'm sure he was getting a lot of input. Is that the right word? From folks who were tired of watching the product. And so I don't think money, I don't like to say these words in a row too many times, but I don't think money is a concern here. This is a vital hire, because you've got an 19,000 seat arena that's sitting less than half full most of the time, except when the Ohio State women play.
Yeah.
Huh? What do you think about that? And, this idea that Ohio State is a, quote, football school has always rankled me, because I think Ohio State puts as much resource and money and whatever else you want to call it, facilities into the basketball program as basically anybody in the country. And I think anybody can see this could be a hell of a job, and just got to get the right guy in there. And I thought Chris Holtmann was pretty close to that. Thought Thad Matta was pretty damn good at it. Clearly, health-wise, he fell off there at the end, couldn't recruit, couldn't even go on the road to recruit for a while. Whether he's totally healthy again obviously he's doing some pretty good things where he is right now. But the bottom line is you go out and get the best guy you can find, and then you look at what the money means. And but guys, who's the best guy you can find? Define that. That's totally relative. And like you said, Ross Bjork, we will be making finally that call with, I'm sure, the help of a search committee, the help of a search firm, et cetera. So you never know what direction he's going. But Buzz Williams, that's a great thing to look at, because sometimes the best thing to do is hire the guy right?
Yeah. And then, the other thing that you're going to have to consider here is the fact that Ted Carter is very, in athletics. He's not afraid to roll up his sleeves and work in athletics as the president. He oversaw a Fred Hoiberg tenure at Nebraska as the basketball coach. Fred Hoiberg had a terrible first couple of years. They stuck with him, and now the Huskers are probably going to the NCAA tournament because he knew to stick with a guy. Ted Carter's got a little bit maybe of the nose for when to get rid of, when to pay the buyout, when to not pay the buyout. You paid the Scott Frost buyout because you knew that was going in the tank and it was not a good situation. You paid extra by just not waiting a couple days. You chose not to pay Fred Hoiberg to go away, and now you're reaping the rewards of that. So, Ted Carter's got a little bit of an idea of what's going on there. And I think that he and Gene Smith and Ross Bjork can collaborate here and come up with a list for Ross Bjork to ultimately make that hire alongside Ted Carter. A couple things to keep in mind as we start to wrap up. I'll give Andy the final word because he's the basketball aficionado here. A couple things to keep in mind. Ross Bjork, during his introductory press conference at Ohio State a few weeks back, mentioned Hancock County and the Findlay, Ohio area quite a bit. Talked about his love for the Findlay, Ohio area. There's one person who's from Findlay who's on that coaching search list. It is Lamont Paris, who's having a great year at South Carolina and was great at Chattanooga with the Mocs, taking them to the NCAA tournament. Keep that in mind as this coaching search progresses. And then another thing that I would almost say we would be pretty misinformed not to say is Scooney Penn, who played at Boston College, Andy, then played at Ohio State, and then was an assistant under Chris Holtmann at Ohio State before heading off to the to the Memphis Grizzlies, where he is currently an assistant coach. He's from New York City. That is a hotbed of college basketball prospects. So, there's a couple things to just consider. There's a couple things to consider here. And now we'll give Andy the final word on the Ohio State.
Was that Andy's intro music?
It was. That's
the
WWE intro. We're gonna announce his name, Andy Backstrom, and give him the final word.
Oh, and you know what? Andy's been, I give him a bunch of grief all the time. He's from the East, you know what I mean? Basketball's in his blood. I grew up with football in my blood, but Andy knows stuff. So I don't know why I even said that, Andy, but I respect your opinion is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the spam call that was just coming in. So, no, but anyway, I think that it was kind of ironic. You have Gene Smith at this press conference, clearly emotional. It was kind of a heavy moment, to be honest, being there. And meanwhile, you got the pump up music going on in the background. You can hear as the women are warming up, the number 2 women's basketball team here. And you've got 12 wins in a row for that program. And that is just the reminder that it's just there. It was there that whole press conference. You could hear the music pounding on the other side of the shot of just, hey, this is what it can be. You can win 12 games in a row in the Big Ten. You can be at the top of the Big Ten standings. You can be the number 2 team in the country that just went to the Elite 8 last year and has a chance to go back and maybe even do bigger things. And the women's team is generating great audiences, as Tim alluded to earlier. The men's team can do the same, and you want to have both of those teams doing really well along with football. I think it was just a really almost fitting but also ironic situation there with that press conference being at 6 p.m., the tip-off of the women's game against Nebraska being at 7 p.m., literally hearing everything going on in the preparation for that game. As a reminder, this is how far the men's team has gone down the hill, and this is how far the women's team has climbed. And that's great for the women's team, but it's also a reminder for the men's team, wow, how did things get this way? And how can they get back to what they were?
And one of the things to keep in mind was the patience that Gene Smith had with McGuff, because things fell off the beam there for a few years ago with the women's team. It just wasn't clicking like he thought it would, and now all of a sudden, you're reaping the benefits of of patience and sticking with a guy or sticking with a coach. Let's put it that way in a situation. But finally, you have to, as you're pointing out, Andy. I just let that secret out of the bag. As you're pointing out there, you have to finally judge. Wait a minute, I've stuck with this guy. It's not happening. That is a major gut feel call as much as anything else, no matter how much you like a guy. And it was very interesting to see how emotional Gene Smith got when asked that question about how tough of a call this was, because anybody who's been around Chris Holtmann likes him a lot, right? But there comes that moment in time when you just got to trust your gut as an athletic director, as the president of a university, as the fan. The fans have been on Chris Holtmann for a while now, the backers and stuff, and finally, the light comes on for Gene Smith and the administrators. If you want to put it that way, I don't think it's ever that quite simplistic, but you're right. The juxtaposition of the women's team and the men's team in that hour, Andy, that was a great example of, yes, you can win in basketball here.
It is interesting that the women's Final Four this year is in Cleveland. If the Ohio State women's basketball team makes it to the Final Four, they will play in the state of Ohio, in Cleveland for the Final Four. And we could be looking at a situation where Ohio State men's basketball is working on contracts for a new men's basketball coach, right? And, in maybe even that same week after the men's tournament wraps up, that Ohio State men's basketball could finalize a contract and the women could be playing in the Final Four. It's just the juxtaposition that's going to continue, Andy. It's a great point from last night, but it's going to continue as we go into a new era of Ohio State basketball.
Yeah, and as Gene pointed out, by the way, basketball, you're almost you could have done this in March. You know what I mean? You could have pulled this trigger in March. But Gene, I gave him credit for this. Others I'm sure won't, but he's trying to get salvage something out of this season for these players. I mean, when you talk to Gene Smith, the thing that stands out most is the student athlete, as he calls it, experience. He just thinks they deserve a shot. You got to pull this trigger now because he thinks maybe there could be a spark there that could still get them some play, to a higher, a higher finish as this season goes on, because there's still some games left. I mean, theoretically they could win what, 9 games here if they go on a run.
Yeah, we'll see. Ohio State men's basketball entering a new era. Jake Diebler taking over for the rest of this season. We'll see who takes over after that. That's for Ted Carter and Ross Bjork to decide, not for the 41-year vet Tim May or Andy Backstrom, the Lettermen Row official basketball guru, and myself, Spencer Holbrook, just a simple host, the people's host right here on this side of the screen. We're going to get out of here and get back to football coverage. Andy's going to keep covering basketball. Tim May and I on the football side for right now.
Nothing simple about Spencer Holbrook. Go ahead.
We'll have spring football coverage all the way up until spring football begins. Andy will have basketball coverage as the coaching search ramps up. It's a big responsibility, the head men's basketball coach at Ohio State. That job is now vacant, and Ohio State will have to make a new hire. Andy Backstrom, Tim May, Spencer Holbrook, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to this special edition of the Lettermen Live, the Lettermen Lounge, Rapid Reaction. It's Ohio State basketball. We're talking about it all on LettermenRow.com. We'll see you guys over there.